Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. My name is Benjamin Red. I'm joined by Nizar Hassan. Hi Nizar, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing very good. We've got a ton to talk about this week.
I know, right?
Yeah. So, we're just going to jump right in there with the news of the week, and you're going to present a whole bunch of stuff on Eden Bay and the coastal property stuff. But before we get to that, very quickly, exciting news. There's been a crazy, massive data heist that was just broken by el-Baida newspaper on Friday. And supposedly, these hackers took data from banks, from government institutions, as well as security institutions themselves.
Wow.
We don't know which ones, but some of them apparently have been compromised by this data hack. And so this was broken on Friday. We're recording on Saturday, by the way. So this is just yesterday. Supposedly, it was one of the biggest breaches in Lebanese history. We don't know a whole lot about it, but we do know al-Akhbar followed up this morning was saying that it connected to one of the major bankers in the country.
Wow.
We don't know who. They wouldn't say who. But this is one of those things as well. We just don't know that much information, but it's so big, and we're getting these hints that we are going to be seeing more about this. So by the time that you're listening to this on Monday, you may know a lot more about what's going on than we do right now. Certainly next week, we are going to be learning. There are going to be more shoes that drop in this scandal, right?
But was no one arrested for this?
We believe 2 are in custody right now.
Okay.
And one of them supposedly has this connection to the banker, some CEO or chairman of a major bank, supposedly, according to al-Akhbar's reporting.
Have they confessed to anything?
I believe one of them has confessed and one of them has not. But the problem with this is that the security agencies themselves really aren't saying anything. And to me, this tells me that, okay, there is something bigger here, because they seem to be holding all of their cards very close to their chest right now. And don't really seem to be comfortable confirming really anything beyond just the very basics that, yes, something like this did happen. Mm-hmm. Even al-Akhbar noted in their report, I think, sort of the same thing, people just aren't talking about this. I know from working at the Daily Star as well, the security agencies just don't seem to be comfortable discussing this as of yet. So anyway, we're going to be looking at this for next week. We'll see what happens. Also this week, it's summertime in Lebanon, and that means electricity cuts, even more than normal. Usually it's cut for 3 hours a day, although in the summer that goes up usually to as much as 6 hours a day sometimes. So the government's been trying to sort of plug this hole, fill in this gap. And they've tried 3 times in the past to do this tender for emergency electricity. All 3 times they failed, though, because other government bodies said, no, this tender is geared towards giving the bid to one company, or to giving the contract to one specific company, Karadeniz Holding, which operates the power barge. Right? Yeah, the Turkish company that operates the power barges, the 2 power barges that are currently feeding into Lebanon's electricity grid. So this 4th one, this week, we had documents leaked. The leakers say these are the tender requirements. We don't know that. We haven't verified that. But if they are, people are saying, well, okay, a few things have changed, but bottom line, it still does seem to be geared towards Karadeniz. So we'll see if this 4th time they actually make it through and are able to issue the tender, invite the bids and go through the process, or if it gets stopped again. We'll see what happens with that. This week we also saw, just a quick note, more Syrians returning on Sunday. We had 41 or 42, not a whole lot return. This is Sunday a week ago. And then Saturday morning, today that we're recording, supposedly about 400 went back. So this is one of those things that it seems that we're going to keep seeing. Also this week, we had some stuff go on with the cabinet formation.
Your favorite topic.
My favorite. I know. I have beaten this horse to death. And our producer Susan has threatened me with bodily harm if I continue to talk about it. But we did have a couple of things happen this week that we do have to talk about. So first off, so the LF and FBM are at war. We know that, ancient history. But Jaja and Aoun met on Monday, right? Which is a good way to start out the week.
Sounds promising.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they said, oh, we're going to have this roadmap and everything to make the cabinet formation work. The next day, Gibran Bassil met with Melhem Riashi. So again, promising sign. And then just like everything, the bottom just seemed to fall out of it. And now we're speaking at the end of the week, and this word that like Bassil is wanting 11 ministers now, which would give him what's called a blocking third in cabinet.
11 ministers from one party.
Yeah. Which it's really over the top. Clearly this is sort of like a negotiating type thing. But this is where it's at. And we also seem to see like this interesting thing where Aoun apparently was trying to get Jaja to meet with Bassil, and to get Hariri to meet with Bassil, and to get Jumblat to meet with Bassil. And so we see this like sort of forced elevation of Bassil into like the
Zaim
like
status,
the first class politician status, I mean, typically it's, Aoun and Jaja and Jublat and Hariri, they're all considered sort of like at that top level. And now it seems as though Aoun is trying to say, no, I'm the president of the republic. I'm above all of that. And now Gibran Bassil, as the president or as the leader of the Free Patriotic Movement, is on your level. And I don't think that really works.
Yeah,
but,
me neither. Not yet, at least.
Yeah, right. I mean, Gibran Bassil has now been in government. This coming Wednesday, he will have been in government for 10 years, by the way. And so I think that there is a really big debate to be had as to whether the hurdles are internal or external. Really, there's a lot of smart people saying that like, oh, it's external things that are causing the delay in cabinet formation. But I think
external, you mean like out of Lebanon?
Yeah, like, oh, maybe Saudi doesn't wants to wait a couple months or something. Okay. I think that is an important debate and one that we should have, but I don't think that we have time for it today. So maybe
soon.
Maybe I'll negotiate with our producer and get that in next week. I don't know. We'll see.
Good luck with that.
All right, and the last like sort of big story I think that we need to cover this week is the trash crisis, right? The ongoing saga of trash in the country. So we saw that play out in like the three biggest cities in the country this week. In Sidon, in the south, a week ago Friday, they had this protest outside one of the waste sorting centers or whatever. And it was a protest by the followers of Osama Saad, the new MP, also the leader of the Popular Nasserite organization. And so at this protest, things sort of turned ugly. There were clashes between the protesters and the plant employees. The protesters were there because like they were saying, oh, there's this bad smell, there's an environmental impact, all this stuff. Long story short, the company that operates the plant was like, screw this, we're going to close the plant. And that caused trash to pile up on the streets. Mm-hmm. And so like, when trash starts piling up on the streets, then things start getting done. In this case, though, what got done was the plant was just like reopened on Monday and collection restarted. And so we're basically back at square one. Nothing has really been resolved here. Also in Tripoli, we have this gigantic trash mountain that's about to collapse. It seems it's supposed to be 25 meters high. It is now about 48 to 49 meters high. So about twice what it should be. That has this retaining wall built around it that is literally bursting at the seams. They are reinforcing this wall. The contractor, Batco, is reinforcing the wall with berms of dirt and scaffolding and all sorts of stuff.
Maybe it's for like a Guinness Records competition, no?
Maybe so.
40 meters is impressive.
It is the largest trash mountain I heard in the Mediterranean area. Yeah. So like if the trash mountain collapses, then that would be very problematic because it's right next to this river and it's also right next to the sea. So it could really have a really bad environmental impact if this wall burst. So back last month on June 21st, the mayor and all of the MPs from Tripoli all got together and talked about like the solutions. Okay, we got to do something about this. And basically, the plan that was sort of put forward and sort of agreed on was that, okay, well, we need something, an immediate solution, and we need like a long-term solution, right? And the immediate solution is basically, we're going to build a dump in the sea. So right next to the plot of land with the trash mountain, we're going to like build this like temporary reclaimed landfill that just juts out into the sea. And that'll be good for like 3 years. And during that 3 years, it'll give us enough time to build a sanitary landfill somewhere else with an incinerator and all sorts of stuff for like a long-term solution. Problem with that is that supposedly people receive sort of assurances that, this is going to be in Der Ammar, which is just a little bit north of Tripoli. It's outside the city, but just, like 10 minutes maybe. And the problem is that Der Ammar is just totally against this idea, right?
Yeah.
I met with the mayor a few days back, and he said, no, just absolutely, we will, the residents of Der Ammar will not accept this at all. And he also said, I received assurances from Saad Hariri like a year ago that this would not happen, and so I don't quite understand why the some of the politicians in Tripoli seem to think that this is going to happen, but when you put all of this stuff together, it seems as though this temporary dump, so-called temporary dump that they're building out into the sea, that's not going to be temporary if they're relying on something like Der Ammar, which is the local residents are just so opposed to. So once again, we have this issue of, the temporary solution may not be so temporary. And so we have problems in Sidon, we have problems in Tripoli, and even in Beirut, we have the ongoing saga of the Burj Hammoud landfill, the ongoing saga of the Costa Brava landfill, which is right like next to the airport, right? And the weird thing about all of these landfills, if you notice in all these sort of trash problems, is that they're all on the coast. So,
why did they build them on the coast, though?
Where else? If you,
because
a lot of people are like, well, you need space, but also just like you got a bunch of NIMBY people, right? Not in my backyard. Like, who wants to live next to a dump?
Yeah.
That is, it's not going to be temporary.
Yeah.
Like the people of Name found that out, right? And so who's going to agree to that? And so where's the easiest place to build? Oh, nobody owns the sea. Well, let's throw our trash in the Mediterranean. I mean, not literally, but yeah, literally, right?
Yeah.
I think this is sort of like a common theme uniting all of these trash crises, and I think that leads to issues with pollution and all sorts of other things that maybe we should dive into in a future episode.
Yes, definitely. And speaking of public coasts and public properties, we've had the issue of the Eden Bay Hotel last week. I'm sure you've heard about it.
Yeah, right.
It was very interesting. There was this launching of the Eden Bay Lancaster Hotel on Ramlet el-Baida, which is the only public beach in Beirut. It's a sand beach. And the opening was protested by a group of activists and protected by security forces. It was a nice scene. And the main issue with this hotel is that it's been protested for more than 2 years now since the constructions began.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of like a cause célèbre, right?
Yeah,
like it's very iconic. This is the only public beach. It's the only sandy beach in Beirut, and they're building this gigantic hotel and resort on it.
Definitely. And apart from all the issues with the hotel itself that we will explain in a bit, the opening was allegedly illegal. According to what activists said, the Ministry of Tourism gave the project the opening license, although it lacked the required documents. So the opening itself should not have happened. And another issue is with the municipality that we'll explain later, that is about the operation license. But to give a brief line of context, the project is owned by Ashur Holding, which is a construction and development company owned by Wissam Ashur, Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri's former son-in-law, and a multi-millionaire owning many hotels and firms, including the famous Lancaster series in Beirut. And what happened is that this was the moment where all the protests against this project had culminated into public uproar to a certain extent among the activists, environmental and public space activists. And there was a campaign of online bad reviews against the hotel because it was opening. So activists thought maybe bad reviews would be the best way of like ruining the business dream before it even happens.
Yeah.
So there were plenty of bad reviews. Like I was counting more than 130 on Google Maps and I don't know how many, but numerous on Facebook. And the reviews were so overwhelming that they were really embarrassing. Like 1.5 rating on Google Maps, I think, or 1.8, despite many people, allegedly staff, posting good reviews. So what happened is that the company took down for the Facebook page. It created one without the review section, and it somehow talked to Google about taking down all the bad reviews. So now you cannot see them anymore. It's 4 point something. It's only good reviews now on Google. But so this whole campaign kind of crashed overnight. And more interestingly, most activists that I've talked to who have reviewed this, the pages, woke up the next morning to a message from Facebook saying someone tried to take over your account, so you need to go through this verification process.
I was just going to ask, like, how does Google or Facebook like take down a review, like, or how do you get them to take down a review? I don't get that.
On Facebook, you change the page or you eliminate it and create another one, so automatically the reviews will go away. On Google Maps, I have no idea of the process. I tweeted Google Maps, they didn't answer. I tweeted them again. They're not very responsive, to say the least. They just ignored me. But yeah, the reviews.
It's a big company. They got a lot going on.
I know, they're very busy.
So I think though that we need to give a little bit of background. Why are these activists so angry about this? What is the history? What happened to bring us to this point?
Exactly.
I think it's important to note that like Eden Rock used to be a resort, like back pre-Civil War. Like I've seen pictures of it, right? Mm-hmm. And then at some point it was destroyed. And like people have been trying to rebuild it since the most recent group like got some approval in 2005, like special approval to do certain things. But for whatever reason, they decided to abandon the project and they sold it in 2011, right?
Yes. They sold it to Issam Ashur, who owns the current project.
Right.
And the plots of land used for the new project are different from the old ones. So one of them is a common plot of land, and this is a center of controversy because there's an issue with the eligibility for development on this plot of land, because the
permits were issued for the old plots of land,
and they
the
were
old
kind of
plans,
extended.
right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So this is one of the main issues with it. And another issue is related to zonings, and specifically how far the project is from the shoreline and from public property.
Whether it's actually on public property, right?
Exactly.
So in order to really understand all of these issues, you really do have to have like a master's degree in public planning. So we're gonna put a few links in the show notes for those of you who want to like go deeper into this stuff. We'll try to stay out of the technicals as much as possible, but I do want to note one thing. Like this goes all the way back to 1925, right? In 1925, like under the French Mandate, there was this order that was handed down that defined what like public property was, public maritime property was, and it said like the highest level reached by the waves in the winter and any sandy or gravelly beaches, automatically public property,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
Now the thing is, when people decided to actually draw the plots of land, though, some plots were drawn like this plot of land that the Eden Bay project is on is actually goes on to the sandy beach, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're the owner of that, like it's your private land according to the law, but also not it's public land according to like this other law. So there's laws that are in contradiction with each other.
Exactly. So
right?
Basically, very simply, it is supposed to be public, however, private people own it.
Right. And in the specific case of Eden Bay, like it's very clearly like a good portion of that project is actually on the sandy beach.
Exactly.
Right.
And this was the main issue, I think, for why this whole activism around this project started happening, because it was right on the beach and because el-Baida is the only public beach available for
Right,
Beirut's residents.
Right. So, regardless of this, Ashur and his company decided to go ahead and start construction anyway. I guess they did have certain permits. Others argue they didn't have other permits. It's another one of these conflicting gray areas, if you will. And so he started building the project on his land. But there were legal challenges, right? And these legal challenges made their way all the way up to the Shura Council, right?
Yes, and in 2017, when this issue came to the surface in terms of media coverage, was when the Shura Council made a series of decisions on the project. The first decision was that the construction should stop because of the violations made by the project. After this first decision, the company did not comply, and it said that it had the permit, the valid permit to construct the project.
Right, which is insane, right? The Shura Council, which is one of the top courts in the country, right?
Yeah.
It is literally under the French system the top administrative court in the country,
Yes.
right? They issued this decision, and the company just ignored it. I remember after this decision came out, seeing with my own eyes, no, they are still building.
Yep.
And they argued, well, no, we have the right to, even if this very important court said, no, you have to stop.
Exactly. So this prompted the court to make another decision, or to kind of reiterate its position and say, no, you have to stop construction. If you don't, then you will pay a huge lot of money for every day of additional works.
It was like $100,000,
Something
right?
like that, really big. So this is when the company actually stopped for a while, until the Shura Council made a third decision by unanimous vote, approving the construction of the project, so kind of giving it the green light to continue. And this contradiction in the Shura Council was not even explained in terms of what are the legal reasons behind this new law on the same topic.
Right. I mean, I've heard some people argue that like this is just sort of how things work. Like the Shura Council will issue like a preliminary injunction and say, hey, no, like, okay, so there are these alleged things you need to stop while we look further into the matter, and then later on decide like, okay, well, we've looked further into the matter and you're fine, you're good to go. So
they gave no explanation, which
right,
is what activists were saying doesn't make any sense, because why would you impose such high penalties and you stop construction if you don't have to explain anything later, right?
Right. I mean, I would agree that it looks fishy, but my only point is that like there could be a reasonable explanation for this. We just don't know what it is because they didn't explain it, right?
Yeah. So when this thing happened in 2017, when it came to surface, Michel Aoun, the president, asked Shibib, Beirut's governor, to stop the construction of the project. And Shibib responded by sending him a copy of the letter of warning that he had sent to Ashur, saying, you have to explain what you're doing on that and that specific issues in relation to the permit and its content. But he actually did not comply with Michel Aoun's request. And he went on TV, including Aoun's own TV, OTV, and said things defending his position and defending the project. So this was a bit of a tension that happened in 2017. But in parallel, Aoun had tasked the Minister of State for combating corruption to look into the issue. And this led to the leaking of a document from Beirut Municipality's engineering unit, which revealed that this unit had rejected Ashur's request to give it an operation permit, which is a requirement for any building to operate in Beirut, based on a number of violations, including things on how the project was actually constructed compared to the original plan, and including the issue with the permit itself, which we spoke about. And this rejection allegedly led Ziad Shbib to remove the head of this engineering unit, according to activists and Al-Akhbar, and put him in the public hygiene unit of the Beirut municipality after he had been for 20 years working in that one. So it was a very sensitive thing that created some tensions within the municipality as well, because in Lebanese law, Beirut is the only area where the head of the municipality, the actual executive authority, is the governor and not the mayor.
Right.
But all of these issues and violations have been most explicitly explained and made clearest by a report, a very recent report by Jad Tabet, the head of Beirut's Order of Engineers. And Jad Tabet explained that there are 8 violations in relation to the things we have mentioned: infringement of public property, issues related to the plots of land, and issues related to the permit, in addition to how the project was actually constructed. The summary of this report is covered by Executive Magazine, and the article will be linked in the description of this episode. as well as another article by Legal Agenda explaining all the legal issues in relation to public beaches in Lebanon, and how they are public but they are not at the same time, etc.
Yeah, so like this is sort of like the larger point, right? Because this is not the only alleged infraction of public maritime property in the country, right? This is just like one case out of many.
Oh yes, there was this whole documentary made by Al Jazeera, as far as I remember, about this specifically, and trying to understand who's behind which project, because all over the Lebanese coast there are these violations of what is supposedly a public beach, and very recently the cabinet made the decision. It was its last session before the parliamentary elections, and it made the decision to approve two projects, one in Damour and one in Zoum Kail, which are projects that will occupy part of the beach as well as part of the sea. So it's like a
Right, those got a lot of attention
waterfront
as well.
kind of
Yeah,
projects. They got a lot of attention because the activists spoke about it, but also because Walid Jumblat spoke about it in one of his tweets. He said that these are horrible decisions, etc. And another very controversial project is an Anfi. We don't know if they have approved it or not, but it's on a plot of land owned by the church, one of the churches, and it's also in violation of certain heritage protection laws. So Jad Tabet has spoken about it.
allegedly, right?
And
Yeah.
Walid Jumblat has said that it has already been approved by the cabinet. We're not sure.
Yeah, this is one of the things. Like the cabinet makes these decisions, but we don't really know. Like this is not a public record type thing. I don't think this has been made public yet.
So as you said, Ben, the issue is that we have a lot of public beaches, or we're supposed to have a lot of public beaches, but very few of them are actually public beaches. In fact, there are around 7 that are operating as public beaches. So if you want to go and swim in the sea in Lebanon, you have maximum of 7 destinations, if you know these destinations at all.
And just to give listeners an idea, like there's roughly something like 20 sandy beaches on Lebanon's coast, and then like a lot of other, like we call them beaches, but they're not sandy, right? They're like the gravel or the rocks or whatever. And the problem though is that like these areas, a lot of them just aren't accessible to the public, even though under law they should be, right? And it basically restricts who can access the sea and the beach to like rich people, essentially, or to people
who can afford going to the resorts. And we're talking
Right.
about entrance fees that range between $20 and $30
yeah,
on average, in addition to very, very expensive
per person. Yeah. So
Exactly.
if you got your family, then like
Even if you
that's-
want to like drink water inside, you have to pay. You're not allowed to bring your own water, and you have to pay something like 10,000 liras for a large bottle of water. So
Yeah.
we're talking about very restricted access. And I think that an issue that kind of is at the bottom of this whole thing, that we are not explicitly talking about, is the question of how many things are being privatized outside of the typical privatization debate around public services.
How do you mean?
What I mean is, this is an issue of private versus public, essentially. And it's not only about a specific plot of land or a specific service. So we hear about privatization when we're talking about education or about electricity, etc. But the fundamental conflict is between economic forces that are trying to privatize any domain that exists, be it a service like education or healthcare, even though they are supposedly also rights, or be it a space like public parks or public spaces or public beaches. And I think this is really the conflict that we are seeing in a lot of places in the world. And the issue with Eden Bay is just another example of how this little piece of public beach that is remaining for Beirut's residents is being taken over by capitalist interests.
Yeah. I mean, if you strip everything away, I would agree with that broadly. Just that this is the issue of public versus private, and right now, especially in Lebanon, like the powers that be, right? It's in their interests to make things private. Like what is public, if something is public, then they have less control over it. They're not able to divvy it up the same way that they can if it's private. So, for instance, if you've got 3 projects on the coast, You can give like one of the private projects to one certain faction, another of the projects to a different faction, and another one to the third faction, and all of these factions can come together in cabinet and agree this is all a great thing to do, and just pass it, and nobody, it's good for everybody, right? Everybody in power, right?
That's kind of what power sharing actually means in Lebanon, as opposed to these political theories about peace and stability. But I think the most important part is that this exact thing that you're talking about, the private versus public and political corruption in Lebanon, like large-scale political corruption, intersect with the private versus public that I was talking about as a neoliberal trend, right? So sectarianism and neoliberalism in Lebanon are converging in a very interesting way and stripping away services but also spaces that are supposed to be the commons.
And all of these issues sort of like come back to this point, I think that we've been trying to make in this podcast, that like the laws are and the actual management, like the mechanics of it, are really sort of like unclear and co-opted. And so whatever's driving this, the powers that be or whoever is able to sort of like exploit this sort of like vague who's in charge of what's legal, what's illegal, what is licit, what is illicit along the coast, and they're able to do that. They benefit from this confusion, this the state of like you don't really know if this is right or wrong or whatever, right?
Definitely, yeah, I totally agree.
And I think that's something that like we should talk about more. Not just related to public lands and coastal lands, but I think that applies to, like you said, other areas of the state infrastructure and other areas of like just like public services and stuff like that. And so I think this is something that maybe we'll talk about again in a future podcast, but maybe on a different subject entirely, right?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Thanks for joining us. I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Nizar Hassan.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
The Lebanese Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by Omar El-Fil.